Guys, I'm back. I want to kind of finish what I started. I did put a video out, maybe yesterday, last night, whatever. Um, I just didn't complete it. I had more information. It's not much more, but it was just some stuff that I also wanted to add. And because my video cut off on me, it kind of like wasn't a part of it, but I felt that it was important. But before I get into that piece that was missing, I want to back up just a little bit and look over this portion of the autopsy, the beginning of Kanika's autopsy. I'm noticing that this autopsy does not have a time of death. It have a date, but not a time. My question is it that not important when doing an autopsy? Is that something that is that normal to just not state a time of death? Like if you really don't have a time, because of certain situations, we understand. But in this situation, I think that they should have been able to determine and come up with a time of death. Especially being as though they're trying to tell us in the world that she died from hypothermia. Dying from hypothermia alone should set an approximate time because it happened in stages. And because we have a time of when she walked in that kitchen, they can count from there, because that's what I did. I'm like, okay, from what I researched and what I came across, hypothermia sets in 30 minutes after being in the cold environment, below 32, 37 degrees or something like that. And then 1 or 2 hours later, you could possibly die. So if she's walking in the kitchen about 3:34, I believe it is, if I'm not mistaken, if it's 2:30, I believe it was 3:30. I don't feel like looking for the video footage, but I believe it was 3:34 is when we saw her walking in the kitchen. So approximate 3:30. If she's walking in the kitchen at 3:30, then maybe 4 o'clock could have been when the hypothermia kicked in, when she supposedly couldn't get out the freezer. 1 or 2 hours after that would be 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, where she possibly could have died if nobody came to save her, which we know nobody came to save her because they didn't find her until 21 to damn near 24 hours later. So if what they're telling us is true, that she died from hypothermia, then the time of death probably would have been stamped or determined at 6 o'clock. If they want to use the environment, they use the environment to say the cause of death, saying it was hypothermia because they found her in the freezer. So automatically, she's in the freezer. That means she died from hypothermia. How we know if the freezer was on? How we know how long if the freezer was on? How do we not know if she died and then they turned the freezer on while she was dead? Like, that could have happened in so many different ways. Like, that's just not enough information. But to me, I think that was a deliberate, how can I say it, act to not put the time on there, because it probably could have pinpointed who is to blame, who's the cause, who's responsible for her death. So not giving us a time, we can't figure out who was in that area at that time. They may be trying to hide this information to keep the authorities clear because they fucked up. They could have been the ones that when they found her, moved her too quick and she could have went into cardiac arrest. Like, so many things could happen. But moving along, I wanted to pretty much get a little bit deeper into a couple other sections. I know I probably mentioned it in my last video, but I'm not sure if I explained it correctly. If I was able to show all that needed to be seen to understand that her death probably was more towards respiratory failure, suffocation, lungs. The middle lobe lung is missing. That could possibly be because the lobe collapsed due to the respiratory failure. You know, it's a possibility that they could have did an organ trafficking situation, but at the end of the day, she was in a situation where she couldn't breathe. You know, whether it was somebody smothering her or smothered her and let her, and she broke free some kind of way. They left her in there, and she still couldn't breathe because of the environment. Like, it's just crazy, you know. So I wanted to try to get into the. I'm sorry for moving this around like this. Maybe I could make it a little bigger as well. Now I know I mentioned the cardiovascular system, but I wanted to try to explain it a little more. The things that I've underlined, not that we underlined, that I underlined. Okay, I see that it says that the cardiovascular, we say free of, where is it? The pericardial sac is intact. This thing is in my way. Let me try to move this. So I want to talk about the cardiovascular system and what I underline. I kind of try to look into this a little more and try to make myself understand the wording a little more as well. It basically say that the heart, was it the heart? No, the pericardial was free of fluid and or adhesions. It also states that the coronary arteries, okay, when they were speaking of the coronary arteries, are widely patent with no evidence of atherosclerosis or thrombosis. Now, when I looked up the word atherosclerosis, they're just saying that the arteries was free of fatty deposits, or thrombosis, which is blood clots. Okay. It also states in there that the internal surface of the aorta is free of atherosclerosis, again, fatty deposits, and the vena cavae free of thrombi or thrombi, which is free of blood clots. So my point in all of this is I had on here let me see if I can find it. I don't want to this shit here. Alright, they're going to do that to me. It states here that the another case of death due to hypothermia, clotting of the blood was found in the aorta and the pulmonary artery. So if blood was found in these areas, then, and I might even be in the wrong section with this one. Yeah, that was for the respiratory. It was for this one, the heart. A case death due to hypothermia, clotting of the blood was found in the heart. But they're saying that in those areas it was free of blood clots and fatty deposits, and the pathway was open, and blood was able to flow through. Nothing was clogging it. and, you know,